I've always had a soft spot for the Cartoon Network series Camp Lazlo. Yeah, it's hard to objectively call it some landmark masterpiece of animation, but it was never really trying to be. It instead wanted to be a grounded, cozy, but still high-energy show that perfectly captured that feeling of being a kid outside in nature, making the most out of summer vacation. Alongside a funny cast of characters, beautiful art direction, and an absolutely killer voice cast, I consider it to be an underrated Cartoon Network classic. And from the looks of it, quite a few people seem to share that sentiment, and while there are also a good amount of people who don't like the show, I've never seen anyone who has active resentment towards it. At worst, they just find it kind of mediocre. That was before I came across the mysterious Mr. Enter's recent video on it. In this video, Mr. Enter states that he finds the show to be not just bad, but absolutely atrocious, on the same level of bad as stuff like My Gym Partner's a Monkey and Squirrel Boy. Cartoons that, mind you, he called among the worst of the entire 2000s decade. The episode he talks about to try and illustrate his hatred of the show, keyword being try, is Season 4's Hold It Lazlo, where Lazlo desperately needs to pee after beating Edward in a lemonade drinking contest, and Edward, being bitter about losing, tries to keep Lazlo from finding a bathroom. When that fails, he tricks him into wearing a diaper. I thought this episode was pretty funny, but it's nowhere near the show's best. As for my thoughts on Mr. Enter as a critic, all I'm gonna say for now is that the quality of his content makes Midwest weather look consistent. I also don't feel the need to discuss his background either because, let's be real, for one reason or another, you all know who Mr. Enter is, so let's just focus on his Lazlo review. I also feel like I should address this because I know I'm gonna have a few people thinking I'm just being super duper butthurt that he's hating on something that I like. I could not give less of a shit if a reviewer does or doesn't agree with my opinion on a piece of media, let alone a children's cartoon. What does matter is that regardless of their stance, they're able to properly defend their case by presenting sensible and well thought out points in a cohesive manner. I personally hate this recent Twitter trend where people immediately write off reviews before watching them, simply because they don't agree with the thumbnail or they don't like their stance or something dumb like that. People should always, without fail, be given the chance to properly communicate their thoughts before getting flack for them. So you know what, Enter? The floor is all yours. Tell us why this episode of Camp Lazlo and the show as a whole are such ungodly abominations that they retroactively started the Black Death in both world wars. Show us what you got.
15 minutes later.
Well, that was the video equivalent to backwashing diarrhea. Okay, we've got a lot to unpack with this one. So let's start around the 1 minute mark, as that's where he starts to explain why he thinks the show as a whole is bad.
At Camp Lazlo's absolute best, it is a pale imitation of SpongeBob. It has the same basic setup, with the happy-go-lucky idiot and his friends making things miserable for the grumps that surround him. However, Camp Lazlo lacks any sort of wit or charm, and more often than not, the episodes are tedious.
Happy-go-lucky protagonists weren't a new thing even back when SpongeBob came out. That alone doesn't make the show a SpongeBob knockoff. Oh, and on the topic of SpongeBob, a lot of writers, artists, composers, and voice actors from the early seasons of that show would actually go on to make Lazlo. And to really bring things full circle, the creator of Lazlo also created Rocko's Modern Life in the 90s. And guess who worked on that show? Despite all of them having similar crews, I still think Lazlo does plenty to separate itself from SpongeBob from its more grounded, camp-related stories, and with a few exceptions, most of the characters don't have a SpongeBob counterpart you could directly compare them to unless you really want to grasp at straws. So it's not like the character dynamics are completely the same. Acting like the show is just a bunch of hacks trying to imitate SpongeBob when a lot of them were the reason why SpongeBob got where it was to begin with is lame as hell. And the fact that he uses the SpongeBob argument without even briefly mentioning that they had similar crews is pretty telling of how much effort and research actually went into this review. As for his argument that the premise is apparently just dumb, nice guy and his friends make the grumps surrounding them miserable, what about that formula did the show do poorly to make it lacking in any wit or charm? I guess that'll just forever remain one of the great mysteries of the world, because he offers no further explanation for this, and immediately just jumps into complaining about the show having multiple sets of identical twins.
One thing that I complained about before is shows that have twins that act exactly the same. One character design, one character archetype, there's no difference between the two. Camp Lazlo actually has this character type, with Chip and Skip. It also has this character type with Dave and Ping Pong. And it has this type again, with the 4 Lemming brothers. All 3 sets of these duplicates act exactly the same as each other, and you can find this type of creativity in everything that is Camp Lazlo.
Now, I'll admit, neither of them were my favorite characters, and I actually do agree with them that they should have had more distinct personalities from each other. But that's in part because outside of the Dungs, neither of them are even all that relevant to the show. The Lemmings don't have a single starring episode, and I remember the Loons having like 2, so why was this even worth bringing up? Like, a lot of his critiques just don't hold any sort of weight because they're either poorly explained or just fucking dumb and pointless in and of themselves. And no, the fact that he plans on doing a full review of the show later does not excuse his points for being too vague. If you didn't want to go too deep into your thoughts on the show as a whole, trim the fat and just focus on the episode. Don't just waste a third of your video's runtime on nothing burger critiques that, as we'll see later, won't even relate to why you hate the episode you're gonna review.
Let's see here. The more down-to-earth guy who is the nicer, smarter assistant of the asshole that's in charge. Who does that make you think of? Waylon Smithers? Who's that? No, we're talking about Slinkman the Slug, the most original character of all time. TV Trope says that he's literally an XP, but that's not how XPs work. He is a ripoff of Waylon Smithers.
Again, enter. Similar trope and ripoff aren't the same fucking thing. You could easily apply the same argument to Cornfed from Duckman, because he's also a deep voice, obedient assistant to the asshole in charge. But again, you don't even bother trying to explain why Slinkman isn't a good example of this trope, so I don't even know what you're trying to get at. He then calls out Clam for being a poor man's version of the quiet smart guy trope. Does he explain why Clam is a poor man's version of the quiet smart guy trope?
No.
Wow, who could have guessed? He says some stuff that doesn't really matter, he whines about Raj's accent a little, then we finally get to his review of the actual episode.
This episode starts with the lemonade drinking contest. Let me ask you a riddle for the ages. Can Squidward ever win something against SpongeBob? No. What makes you think that Edward from Camp Lazlo ever had a chance?
Let's see how well you handle lemonade from concentrate.
He is the perpetual loser. And for him to win every now and again against our main character, that would be unpredictable and thus not welcome in this show.
You know what? Enter isn't wrong here. Edward has never been able to score a W before. You know, as long as you ignore the episode where his burp choir is successful, or the one where he beats Lazlo at kickball, or the episode where he won the race and only got mad because his trophy was normal size instead of huge, or episodes like The List where he and Lazlo were on even footing, or, you know, the fact that Edward is a bad guy who goes out of his way to antagonize others and never actually deserves to win? Like, Enter. Buddy, I know you have a history of not actually watching the shows you review, but even you have to admit this is getting kind of ridiculous.
Edward takes his lemonade without sugar, and we see here one of the main problems with the show overall. SpongeBob gets criticized for its over-the-top bases and its over-reliance on them, and that is certainly a problem with Neo SpongeBob. Camp Lazlo has the opposite problem though. It's too restrained too often, making it look low budget, like it's trying to fit in with the low budget Flash cartoons of the time.
I really liked a lot of the expressions in Camp Lazlo, especially from the later episodes. They definitely don't push them as far as something like Ren and Stimpy or New SpongeBob, but there are still some damn funny ones, including a lot of the ones he cited as bad. But that alone is fine, we're just gonna have to agree to disagree on that. No, the real problem is that he then backpedals and says the expressions aren't that bad, just mediocre. Not long after saying they were one of the main issues of a show he finds plain awful.
And if you don't believe me about the expressions, see what you think about some of these. This is like legitimately the best the show has to offer. It's not the worst in the world to be fair, but it's like mediocre, like white bread with no butter mediocre.
Like, his arguments aren't even consistent in and of themselves. It's ridiculous how sloppy this whole thing is. It's like he read a script outline word for word instead of the final draft. And it only gets worse as we continue.
So anyway, Lazlo's first inclination is to rush to the camp bathroom, where we find that the line is super long. I'm just gonna show you this picture here, and see if you can see why the plot doesn't make sense with this premise. The woods are fucking everywhere. Like, tell me you've never been camping before without telling me that you've never been camping before.
Lack of self-awareness here is beyond parody. Most summer camps don't want you to do your business in the woods. That is why they have actual bathrooms. He later tries to defend this point by saying that Lazlo should be inclined to piss in the woods regardless because he's a spider monkey, and he even cites Jake from My Gym Partner's a Monkey as an example. I remember growing up, my mom would always get Lazlo and Gym Partner mixed up whenever either of them came on, because they both starred in monkeys. I'm starting to think Enter made that same mistake and has been talking about an episode of Gym Partner this whole time. Because in Camp Lazlo, the monkey show he's supposed to be talking about, the talking animals act like people. not wild animals. So no shit they're gonna prioritize a normal bathroom. This is like complaining that when Mordecai from Regular Show is fleeing from something, he runs instead of flies. It's just nitpicking for the sake of nitpicking.
Then you'll never expect what happens in an episode about urine. It gets kinda gross. Lazlo pees so much the lake rises. And when a fish played by Edward scolds him,
I don't swim in your toilet, so please don't whiz in my home.
Lazlo, absorbs it back in. Like a sponge. Ah, cool, you got the same musical sting pack that SpongeBob has. I love that one!
We'll dive more into this later, and let's be real, this type of thing isn't unheard of for Enter, but he's taking a joke that's relatively tame in execution and painting it to be far more disturbing and disgusting than it actually is. He also desperately tries to draw more comparisons to SpongeBob because of Lazlo reverse peeing, and the music sting that plays when the fish is revealed to be Edward. Both comparisons are too forced to be a valid argument, but not forced enough to loop back around into being funny. Especially the latter comparison, since a lot of SpongeBob music can be heard in cartoons that came out before it. Way too many people forget this for some reason, but like, SpongeBob wasn't the first cartoon ever made.
Finally, Lazlo decides to try and pee on the only tree that looks like it's being used for something else, but Edward stops him. I know that Edward doesn't really care, but like, why would Lazlo care what Edward thinks? Lazlo is usually so in his own little world that being criticized is the last thing that he tends to care about.
No he's not. Outside of a few episodes where they do push the stupidity too far, Lazlo is generally grounded enough in reality to where he can at least recognize when he's being criticized, and he'd definitely care about being perceived as a savage.
Edward disguised himself as the fish, and Lazlo didn't see him put up the out of order sign. But every other time that Lazlo is trying to pee, Edward is there. You know, the grump who has a grudge that Lazlo knows is a grump who holds a grudge. The fact that Lazlo doesn't put two and two together makes him frustrating in a Season 6 SpongeBob kind of way.
Where in the episode do they indicate that Lazlo knows that Edward is holding a grudge? When Edward vowed to get his revenge, the campers had already hoisted Lazlo away to celebrate and take pictures. As far as we know, the last thing Lazlo saw from Edward before he started fucking with him was him passing out.
Hooray for Lazlo! Wait, what? Hooray for Lazlo? I refuse to lose like this! This isn't over, Lazlo!
Okay, let's have a group picture with the champion. I want to stand next to this champion.
And of course he's not going to immediately assume the worst in Edward because he sees Edward as a friend. Again, I'm sure those details got lost on you from all that not watching the show you've been doing, but it's pretty important and it kind of clears up this plot hole you made up.
So anyway, Lazlo pees for like 3 days. Please stop trying to put the image of a monkey's dick in my brain.
I first saw this episode when I was 5, and even back then, I understood the innuendo behind that last live action bit. And I've seen this episode multiple times since. And even so, I can confidently say that it had never once made me start thinking about monkey dicks. Now, I'm not trying to assume anything about you, Enter, I just wanted to share my own experience.
Alright, time to level with you guys. I've been harsh so far. Maybe too harsh. You're probably watching all of this and scratching your head. Maybe not, but you're probably going like, this is it. This is what's gotten a bee in your bonnet today.
Wow, this is the first objectively true thing you've said all video. I don't understand why this episode is bad so far. I mean, I clicked this review with the intent of doing so, but instead I've been greeted with 3 AM drunk rambling stitched together with scotch tape and gum trying to pass as a review. But you know what? None of that matters now. Because this is where you finally tie everything together to make your previous complaints make any coherent sense. Take it away, Enter.
Because this episode is about to get very, very, very not good. So Edward gives Lazlo a diaper. Because Edward says that it's not a diaper, Lazlo buys into his lie and puts it on. Can I ask, did anyone anywhere ever like protagonists this stupid? And if you did, please tell me why. What exactly do you get out of a character who is so blind to reality that they should have earned their Darwin Award decades ago?
Oh wow, so now you're just blatantly leaving out important details to make your point stronger. Yeah, sure, why not? Edward doesn't convince Lazlo to wear it just by saying it's not a diaper. He tells him it's a special diaper called a Tinkeltog that's worn by astronauts on missions. That's what enticed Lazlo into wearing it. It's the same for the other campers later in the episode. And he still leaves that detail out when he gets to that part. I mean, I guess it's just par for the course for Enter at this point. Now, are Lazlo and the others still gullible for this? Yes, but in a way that's far more in line with their characters than what you're letting on, Enter. You're painting it as if they just went, Lazlo, I want you to wear this. That's a diaper. No, it's not. Okay.
All that happens in this episode is that Lazlo gets tricked into wearing a diaper. Then everyone starts laughing at him because Edward has the explicit intent to humiliate Lazlo. However, Lazlo convinces everyone that wearing diapers is cool. And so in the next scene, all of the campers are wearing diapers, with a nice farting sound effect or two.
What's going on?
He then proceeds to do the Enter classic of trying to paint harmless jokes as way more disgusting than they actually are, along with a bit of the Gen Z classic of retroactively claiming that certain jokes and scenes were meant to be fetish fuel. In this case, he blatantly implies that the scene where everyone puts on Tinkeltogs and gives them a test run is meant to be diaper fetish fuel. He tries really hard to reassure us that he's not, but it's the same way your annoying younger sibling would be like, I'm not poking you, I'm not poking you, I'm not poking you. If you actually watch the scene for yourself, you'll notice that the episode's self-censored by not only not showing their diapers while they're pissing, but not even having a pissing sound effect.
Lazlo, can you save my seat while I go to the bathroom?
Sure, Raj.
Okay, I'm done.
Everyone look! Roz just went to the bathroom like the astronaut!
Just like the astronauts.
So in execution, this scene is only as disgusting as your imagination lets it be. And at worst, it's just a bit cringeworthy. Though credit where it's due, this part was pretty goddamn funny.
I forgot I wasn't wearing Tinkeltogs.
Regardless of if the joke landed for you or not, the episode makes it very mind-numbingly obvious that it is one, on top of being karma for Edward trying to humiliate Lazlo. Though I'm sure that also flew past Enter because judging by the way he described Edward's role in the show earlier in the video, I'm not even sure if he knows that Edward is an antagonist. But you know what? Whatever. Let's just give him a chance and see his interpretation of the scene.
And then this happens.
Lazlo, can you save my seat while I go to the bathroom?
Sure, Raj.
Okay, I'm done.
And when Raj pisses in the diaper, everyone calls it cool, and Raj looks very, very pleased with himself. Then the other campers start pissing themselves.
I forgot I wasn't wearing Tinkeltogs.
Okay, look, I'm probably one of the people least in the know about this kind of stuff in general. So you tell me how innocent you can read any of this. I'm not going to assume any intent among anyone behind whatever the fuck any of this is, because I don't know. None of us know. I want to make that clear. However, I'm not going to deny the effect here. You see exactly what this looks like. You cannot argue that this doesn't look like what it looks like. This episode is making totally spies blush and go, dude, have some fucking shame.
I mean, I already told y'all what was gonna happen. I mean, what, were you expecting him to not go overboard with his implications about a joke in a cartoon? Were you expecting his approach to critiquing to improve at all throughout his decade-plus career? Y'all a bunch of comedians.
And then finally, peer pressure gets to Edward to finally put on a diaper. Then his brothers come in.
Can you bring any more shame to our family?
I can't believe we're related.
So in conclusion, I hate Camp Lazlo. This is why. Thank you for listening to my TED Talk. Please stop asking me.
And yeah, that is more or less where the video ends. Doesn't bother recapping why the episode is bad or how it ties into his thoughts on the show overall. It just kinda ends. He doesn't even try to say anything of substance, really. I think it's supposed to be a joke here, but it's kinda hard to tell because the entire fucking video is like this. Like, genuinely, this review feels like its runtime is longer than the amount of time it took for Enter to script it. His review of the show only consisted of baseless, surface-level comparisons to other shows. And even if we were to excuse that as just a preview for his eventual CN Real video on it and only focus on his analysis of the episode, cool. We're still left with random nitpicks that don't matter, declaring plot holes where there aren't any, not understanding the characters or their dynamics despite claiming to have watched a lot of the series, and trying way too hard to paint scenes that aren't that disgusting or fetishistic in execution as the most disturbing, unsightly horrors ever seen in entertainment. His critiques don't work in and of themselves, they don't form a cohesive or convincing argument on why the show or the episode are bad. Even if I had never watched Camp Lazlo before, this wouldn't even give me a good clue on what I should even make of it. This review is just a steaming pile of grade A certified dog shit, and it is not much better than his worst Nikorama reviews. Oh, and on that note, I want to reiterate, him planning on going into more detail about the show for his CN Real project does not excuse this video for being so awful. Hell, if anything, if this shit in his Nikorama series are anything to go by, I wouldn't get my hopes up for that review either. Anyway, that's the video. Like, subscribe, all that fun stuff. Maybe I'll do something like it again, but probably not because no one really cares about commentary videos anymore. Anyway, I'm out of here. Goodbye.